What starts as a simple act of kindness becomes a web of lies, manipulation, and betrayal that threatens everything Khloe holds dear. As she falls deeper into James's world of luxury and power, she discovers that some people prey on goodness itself. The morning sun cut through the downtown smog like broken glass, casting harsh shadows across the gridlocked street where Khloe Martinez watched her future slip away 1 second at a time. Her phone screen glowed mercilessly. 9:50 a.m. 10 minutes until the interview that could change everything. The Mercedes sat dead in the right lane, its sleek black surface reflecting the chaos of honking cars and frustrated commuters. Behind it, traffic stretched for blocks, a river of steel and rage that had swallowed her bus and her carefully planned timeline whole. She could see him through the crowd of stopped vehicles, a man in an expensive charcoal suit, phone pressed to his ear, running his fingers through dark hair that caught the harsh morning light. Even from this distance, his desperation was palpable, radiating outward like heat from asphalt. Khloe's leather portfolio felt heavy in her grip, weighted with 6 months of preparation, rehearsed answers, and Rita's sacrifices. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. Kindness opens more doors than ambition ever could, but ambition paid bills. Kindness was a luxury they couldn't afford. The bus driver's impatient honking jarred her back to reality. "Hey, Rita." Window, she watched the stranger pace beside his disabled car, his movements sharp with barely contained panic. Kept checking his watch, kept apologizing to every driver who cursed him as they crawled past. Something twisted in her chest, cognition, maybe. The look of someone who understood that some moments could define everything that came after. "Lady, you getting off or what?" The bus driver called back to her. 9:51 a.m. The choice crystallized in the space between heartbeats. Khloe stood, her navy blazer suddenly feeling like armor she was about to shed. "I'm getting off," she said, and stepped into the chaos. The morning air hit her face, thick with exhaust and desperation. She dodged between stopped cars, her heels clicking against asphalt still warm from the early sun. The stranger was closer now, and she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the way his jaw tensed as he spoke into his phone. "Excuse me," she called out over the symphony of horns. "Do you need help?" James Harrison turned, and their eyes met across the small space between his broken dream and hers. For a moment, the noise fadaged as two people caught in the machinery of a day that refused to go according to plan. "That's very kind of you," he said, ending his call with a sharp tap. "I don't want to make you late. You look like you have somewhere important to be." 9:52 a.m. "I do," Khloe admitted, setting down her portfolio on the grimy sidewalk. "But maybe I can help quickly. What's the problem?" As James gestured helplessly at his car, explaining the sudden death of his engine, Khloe felt the weight of her decision settling over her shoulders like a shroud. Rita would understand. Rita had taught her to choose compassion over calculation, even when the cost was everything. Shh. She rolled up her sleeves and approached the Mercedes, her manicured nails already chipped from the morning's tension. "Pop the hood," she said, and watched his eyebrows rise in surprise. The engine bay opened before her like a puzzle she'd learned to solve in her uncle's garage years ago. The battery terminal hung loose, disconnected, a simple problem with devastating consequences. "Found it," she announced, reconnecting the cable with steady hands that betrayed none of the panic screaming through her veins. The Mercedes roared to life. James stared at her with something approaching awe, but Khloe was already checking her phone. 9:58 a.m. 6 blocks away from Sterling Communications, where Mr. Thompson waited with his zero-tolerance policy for lateness. "How can I thank you?" James asked, but she was already backing away, portfolio clutched against her chest like a shield. "You don't need to," she said, her voice catching slightly. "I'm just glad I could help." That's when he noticed the way her hands trembled. The desperate glance at her watch, the careful composure cracking at the edges. "You're late for something important, aren't you?" His voice was softer now, understanding threading through the words. "Because you stopped to help me." The admission hung between them in the exhaust-heavy air. And Khloe felt something shift, not just in this moment, but in the trajectory of everything that would follow. Yes, she whispered, and the word tasted like endings. Get in the car. The words cut through the morning chaos with startling authority. James stood beside the now purring Mercedes, his hand on the passenger door handle, watching Khloe with an intensity that made her stomach flutter. I can't, she said, though her feet had already stopped moving away. I don't even know you. James Harrison extended his hand, and she noticed the expensive watch catching the light, the subtle calluses that spoke of work beyond boardrooms. And you just saved my morning. The least I can do is save yours. 10 a.m. Khloe felt the exact moment her interview began without her. Felt the opportunity dissolve like sugar and rain. 6 months of preparation, Rita's sacrifices, the graduation gift portfolio that cost more than groceries for a monthful of it, slipping through her fingers like water. It's too late now anyway, she said, but her voice broke on the words. No. James's voice was firm, certain. It's not. Before she could protest further, he was on his phone again, his tone shifting into something that commanded attention. Thompson. James Harrison. I need a favor. Khloe's blood went cold. What are you doing? James held up one finger, still speaking into the phone with the casual authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Reschedule the Martinez interview for this afternoon. Something urgent came up for her this morning. A pause. Trust me on this one, Richard. I'll explain later. The call ended, and James looked at her with something that might have been pride. Their problem solved. How do you know Mr. Thompson? The question came out strangled, desperate. Richard and I go way back. Golf partners, actually. James shrugged as if moving mountains was merely Tuesday morning routine. Your interview is now at 2 p.m., which gives us time for lunch, assuming you'll let me thank you properly. The casual use of power left Khloe reeling. This stranger, this James Harrison, had just reached into her life and rearranged it with a phone call. The relief was overwhelming, but underneath it, something else stirred. Something that felt dangerously close to resentment. Why? She asked. Why would you do that for someone you don't know? James was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on something beyond the traffic jam. When he spoke, his voice carried weight she hadn't heard before. Because 6 months ago, I was late for the most important meeting of my life. Would have changed everything. No one stopped to help me then. He looked at her directly, and she saw something raw in his dark eyes. I lost everything that day. Everything that mattered. The confession hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they wanted to cross. I'm sorry, Khloe said, and meant it. Don't be. It taught me something about the cost of being alone. James opened the passenger door wider. So what do? You say, lunch with a stranger who owes you more than you know? Khloe looked at the open car door, at this man who had just casually rearranged her world, at the portfolio that no longer felt like her only lifeline. The smart thing would be to say no, to walk away, to maintain the careful boundaries that kept life predictable. But Rita hadn't raised her to be smart. Rita had raised her to be kind. Okay, she said, and slipped into the leather seat that smelled like expensive cologne and secrets. As James pulled into traffic, Khloe caught her reflection in the side mirror. She looked different somehow. It just disheveled from the morning's chaos, but changed in a way she couldn't name. Like someone who had just stepped across a threshold without realizing it existed. Where are we going? She asked. James smiled, and it transformed his entire face, erasing the desperate businessman and revealing someone younger, more dangerous. Somewhere you can tell me who you really are, Khloe Martinez, he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a promise and a threat all at once. The Mercedes merged into the flow of downtown traffic, carrying them both toward a lunch that would reveal more than either was prepared to share, and away from the carefully planned life that Khloe was only beginning to realize she had never really wanted. In the distance, the Sterling Communications building grew smaller in the rearview mirror, and with it, the last traces of the person she used to be. The restaurant James chose was the kind of place that existed in glass towers, where conversations happened in hushed tones, and every table cost more than Khloe's monthly groceries. She felt the weight of curious glances as the Mater D led them to a corner booth with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. This is too much, she said, sliding across leather that probably cost more than Rita's car. "It's Tuesday lunch," James replied. But she caught the way he watched her take in the opulence, cataloging her reactions like data points. "Tell me about the interview. What makes sterling communications so important?" Khloe twisted her napkin, the crisp linen foreign under her fingers. "It's not just a job. It's everything I've worked for since graduation. My grandmother Rita raised me, worked double shifts at a hospital cafeteria to put me through college." The words came easier than expected, spilling out like confession. "This position could change our lives. Finally, give her the comfortable retirement she deserves." Something shifted in James's expression, a softness that made him look younger. "She sounds like an incredible woman." "She is," Khloe's voice caught. "She taught me that kindness matters more than ambition. That helping others is always the right choice, even when it costs you everything." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. "What about you?" she asked, needing to shift focus from the intensity of his attention. "What was the meeting you missed 6 months ago?" James was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. He spoke. His voice was carefully controlled, each word measured like it might detonate. "My wife died in a car accident 2 years ago, Alina." The name came out rough like gravel. "She was pregnant. Our first child." Khloe's breath caught. "James, I'm so sorry." The meeting was with investors who wanted to fund a medical research foundation in her name. Pediatric cancer research, it's what she would have wanted. His hands clenched around his water glass. "I was late because my car broke down. No one stopped to help. By the time I arrived, they'd given the funding to another proposal." The weight of his confession settled between them like a physical presence. Khloe understood now why her simple act of kindness had meant so much, why he'd moved heaven and earth to save her interview. "I'm starting the foundation anyway," he continued, his voice steadier now. "But it's been harder without the backing. Slower." "What kind of research?" she asked. "Experimental treatments for childhood leukemia. Alina lost her younger brother to it when she was 16. She always said, if she could save even one family from going through what hers did, her life would have meaning." The waiter appeared to take their orders. The food felt secondary to the current flowing between them across the white tablecloth. James Harrison wasn't just a stranger with an expensive suit and casual power. He was a man carrying the weight of profound loss, trying to build something meaningful from the wreckage of his world. "There's something else," James said after. The waiter left. His tone had changed, become more careful. "Something I should tell you about Sterling Communications." Khloe's pulse quickened. "What about it?" "I know Richard Thompson because I used to work there, years ago, before I started my own company." James met her eyes, and she saw apology forming in his expression. "I left under difficult circumstances." "What kind of circumstances?" "I discovered some financial irregularities. Money being moved around, clients being overcharged, employees being underpaid." His jaw tightened. "When I brought it to Richard's attention, he offered me a promotion to keep quiet. When I refused, he made sure I couldn't work anywhere else in the industry." The blood drained from Khloe's face. "Are you saying Sterling Communications is corrupt?" "I'm saying Richard Thompson values loyalty over integrity. And if you work there, you'll eventually have to choose between the two." The revelation hit like ice water. Everything she'd worked for, everything Rita had sacrificed for, the dream job that was supposed to save them, but that was built on quicksand. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. James reached across the table, his finger stopping just short of hers. "'Cause you saved me this morning when you had everything to lose. 'Cause you chose kindness over ambition. 'Cause someone like you deserves to know the truth before making a decision that could define your life." Khloe stared at their hands, almost touching across the white expanse of linen. The man across from her had just destroyed her carefully constructed future with a handful of words. But something in his eyes told her this was only the beginning. "What am I supposed to do now?" she asked. James's smile was sharp, dangerous, full of promise. "That depends. How do you feel about taking risks?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge, and Khloe realized that everything her interview, Sterling Communications, Even Rita's comfortable retirement had become secondary to the electricity crackling in the space where their fingers almost touched. Outside the window, the city sprawled beneath them, full of possibilities and dangers she was only beginning to understand. And in the reflection of the glass, she saw herself poised on the edge of a choice that would change more than just her career. It would change everything she thought she knew about who she was meant to become. 3 weeks later, Khloe stood in the marble lobby of Harrison Technologies, her new employee badge still warm from the printer. The decision to decline Sterling Communications had felt impossible, until James offered her something better, a position heading marketing for the Alina Harrison Foundation. With a salary that would change Rita's life overnight, the foundation. Offices occupied the top 3 floors of James's building, with floor-to-ceiling windows that made the city look like a kingdom spread out below. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of a precipice. The quarterly reports came in, Nina said, appearing at Khloe's shoulder with coffee and concern in equal measure. Want to explain why the foundation has only funded to research projects in 8 months? Khloe's stomach dropped. Nina had insisted on celebrating her new position by taking a job as her assistant, despite being overqualified. Ow! Now her best friend stood holding documents that made Khloe's world tilt sideways. That can't be right, Khloe said, but her voice lacked conviction. Nina spread the papers across Khloe's glass desk. 12 million in donations, Khloe. Most of it funneled into administrative costs and consulting fees. The actual research funding is barely 10%. The numbers swam before Khloe's eyes like accusations. She thought of James's passionate speech about saving children, about Elena's legacy, about meaningful work that could change the world. She thought of Rita's face when she'd announced the salary that would finally allow her grandmother to retire. Has to be an explanation, Khloe whispered. There is. The voice came from the doorway, smooth and familiar. James stood there in his perfectly tailored suit, his expression unreadable. Nina, could you give us a moment? Nina shot Khloe a look, full of warning before gathering the papers and leaving them alone. The silence that followed felt dangerous, charged with electricity that had nothing to do with the chemistry that had been building between them for weeks. How long have you known? James asked, moving to the window with his back to her.
I don't know.
What? But the question came out hollow, defeated. There is no foundation. Not really. He turned to face her, and she saw something in his eyes that looked like pain. The Alina Harrison Foundation is a shell, Khloe. A way to launder money from my tech company, to avoid taxes. To create the appearance of philanthropy without the inconvenience of actually helping anyone. The confession hit like a physical blow. Khloe gripped the edge of her desk, her knees threatening to buckle. Alina wasn't pregnant, James continued, his voice flat, businesslike. She didn't die in a car accident. She left me for my business partner, taking half my company and most of my self-respect with her. The foundation was supposed to be my revenge, a way to rebuild my reputation while screwing the system that let them both walk away clean. You lied to me. The words came out strangled, broken. Out everything. I told you what you needed to hear to make the choice I wanted you to make. James stepped closer, and she could see the calculation behind his dark eyes. You were so perfect, Khloe. So kind, so honest, so willing to sacrifice for others. The ideal face for a charitable foundation. Donors love authenticity, and you gave me that in spades. Khloe felt something dying inside her chest, something that had been growing fragile and bright in the weeks since that morning on the street. The job offer, the salary. Was any of it real? The money is real. The work is real. Just not what you thought it was. James moved behind his desk like a predator, claiming territory. You've been incredibly effective, Khloe. Donations are up 40% since you started. Your story, your background, your grandmotherate, all plays beautifully in the marketing materials. The room spun around her. Rita's face flashed through her mind, proud, grateful, finally able to rest after decades of sacrifice. All of it built on lies and stolen hope. The children, she whispered, the research. The families who think they're contributing to something that matters will find other foundations to support, other causes. The money they lose here is a tax write-off anyway. Gosh. James shrugged, as if discussing whether. Don't be naive, Khloe. This is how the world works. We're just better at it than most. The sound that escaped her throat was part sob, part growl. She thought of the thank you letters from parents, the photos of sick children she'd been using, in grant proposals, the hope she'd been selling like a commodity. I won't do this, she said, her voice stronger now, fueled by rage and betrayal. I'm going to expose everything. The foundation, the fake research, all of it. James smiled, and it was the cruelest expression she'd ever seen. With what proof? Everything is legally documented, properly filed. The foundation exists. It pays salaries. It makes donations, just smaller ones than advertised. You could try to whistleblow, but who would believe you? A marketing coordinator with no financial background making accusations against a successful businessman? He moved around the desk until he was close enough to touch. It's close enough that she could smell the expensive cologne that used to make her heart race. Besides, he said softly, dangerously, think about Rita. Think about her mortgage payment, her medical bills. The comfortable life you've finally been able to give her. Are you really willing to throw all that away for the sake of perfect strangers? The ultimatum hung between them like poison. Choose Rita's security or stranger's hope. Choose love or justice. Choose the devil she knew or the uncertain darkness of doing what was right. Khloe looked at James. Harrison Rayleigh looked at Hyman. Saw not the grieving widower who had moved mountains to save her interview, but a predator who had recognized her weakness and exploited it with surgical precision. You're right about one thing, she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. I am naive. I thought kindness mattered more than ambition. I thought people could change, that they were basically good if you just gave them the chance. She picked up her employee badge and set it on his desk with infinite gentleness. But you know what, James? I'd rather be naive and poor than clever and soulless. As she walked toward the door, James called after her, his voice losing its calculated control for the first time since she'd known him. You're making a mistake, Khloe. You'll never find another opportunity like this. You'll never be able to. Give Rita what she deserves. She paused at the threshold, her hand on the door frame, and looked back at him one last time. Maybe not, she said, but at least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like the end of everything she thought she wanted, and the beginning of something she wasn't sure she had the courage to face. 6 months later, Khloe sat in a federal courthouse, watching James Harrison's world collapse in real time. The man who had once moved heaven and earth with a phone call now sat hunched at the defendant's table, his expensive suit unable to hide the weight of what he'd lost. The investigation had started with her. One email to the state attorney general's office, one conversation with a reporter who specialized in non-profit fraud, one choice to value truth over comfort. The dominoes had fallen faster than anyone expected. The defendant used the Alina Harrison Foundation as a vehicle for tax evasion and money laundering, the prosecutor was saying, her voice cutting through the courtroom's hushed atmosphere. Donors believed they were funding pediatric cancer research. Instead, their contributions were funneled into shell companies and offshore accounts. Khloe's testimony had been the cornerstone of the case. 3 hours on the witness stand, laying bare every lie, every manipulation, every moment she'd chosen to believe in the fiction James had woven around his broken heart. The defense attorney had tried to paint her as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge, but the financial records spoke louder than accusations. Now, as the judge read the verdict, guilty on all counts, Lo felt no triumph.
Whole satisfaction.
Of a necessary wound finally healing clean, Ms. Martinez? She turned to find Assistant District Attorney Sarah Chen approaching, her expression mixing professional satisfaction with something that looked like concern. I wanted to thank you again, Sarah said. Without your cooperation, Harrison would have continued defrauding donors for years. The families affected by pediatric cancer deserved better than his lies. Khloe nodded, watching as James was led away in handcuffs. For just a moment, his eyes found hers across the courtroom, and she saw not the manipulative predator who had used her kindness against her, but the broken man underneath the cruelty. It didn't excuse what he'd done, but it made the victory taste like ash. What happens now? Khloe asked. The legitimate foundations will receive the remaining assets. The real research will finally get funded. Sarah's smile was grim but satisfied. Justice doesn't always look like happiness, but it looks like this. Outside the courthouse, Nina waited with coffee and a shoulder to lean on. The past 6 months had been brutal unemployment, legal depositions, death threats from people who thought she was destroying a children's charity. Rita had never complained, never suggested that perhaps Khloe should have kept quiet. But the stress had aged her grandmother in ways that no comfortable salary could undo. "How do you feel?" Nina asked as they walked toward the subway. Khloe considered the question. She was broke, professionally radioactive, and responsible for sending a man to prison. The whistleblower settlement would cover Rita's medical bills and not much else. Her naive faith in human goodness had been shattered and rebuilt into something harder, more realistic, but no less committed to doing what was right. "Like I can breathe again," she said, and realized it was true. The phone call came as they descended into the subway station. No number, but Khloe answered anyway. "Ms. Martinez? This is Dr. Rebecca Torres from Children's Hospital. I wanted to thank you personally." Khloe frowned, pressing the phone closer to her ear over the noise of approaching trains.
Thank me for what?
The Alina Harrison Foundation case led to a federal audit of nonprofit medical research. We've received emergency funding for 3 pediatric cancer trials that were on the verge of being canceled. Dr. Torres's voice carried exhaustion and hope in equal measure. 16 children will receive experimental treatment because of your courage. I thought you should know. The call ended, and Khloe stood on the platform with tears streaming down her face. Not tears of sadness or regret, but something cleaner, something that tasted like Rita's wisdom about kindness, opening doors that ambition never could. "Good news?" Nina asked. "The best kind," Khloe replied. 3 weeks later, she started work at a small nonprofit that investigated charity fraud. The salary was a fraction of what James had offered. The office was a converted warehouse in a questionable neighborhood, and the work was often thankless and always difficult. But when she looked in the mirror each morning, she recognized the woman staring back at her. Someone who had chosen the harder path not because it was rewarded, but because it was right. Someone who understood that kindness without wisdom was dangerous, but wisdom without kindness was worse. Rita had been right about doors and kindness, but she'd left out the most important part. Sometimes the door that opens is the one you build yourself, brick by careful brick, in the ruins of everything you thought you wanted. The Alina Harrison Foundation was dissolved. James Harrison was serving 5 years in federal prison. And somewhere in a children's hospital, 16 kids were fighting cancer with treatments funded by money that had finally found its way to where it belonged. It wasn't the ending Khloe had planned that morning. She stepped off the bus to help a stranger. But it was the ending that mattered, and in the space between what she'd lost and what she'd found, she discovered that some prices were worth paying, even when they cost everything. The end.